Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 39 of Trend Talks BizSec. I'm your host, Jon Clay, VP of Threat Intelligence at Trend Micro. And joining me again is Greg Young, VP of Cybersecurity at Trend Micro. Greg, how are you today?
Great to see you, my buddy John. Great to see you.
Yeah, if you're watching this, it's kind of mid-January, January 21st to be exact. And I was telling Greg just a minute ago, I live in Colorado, work out of a home office, and it was -6 Fahrenheit this morning, and it's now 20, so at least it's warmed up a little bit. But the cold that's going on in the U.S. right now is pretty crazy. I saw a video of Galveston, Texas, with snow covering the beaches. But and Greg, you're up in Canada, right? But it's not that bad there, right?
It's about it's been running in the -15s, -20 Celsius, which is a cold snap. That's pretty cold, but we're used to it, so it's a little different. I myself, though, prefer when I lived in the Caribbean and it was warm and happy and all things were good. But yeah, nobody likes the embracing the cold person. So
yeah, exactly. I grew up in Michigan, so like you, I'm kind of used to the cold, and then now I'm in Colorado. But I do prefer going to warm weather at some point, and so I will probably do that in the next couple of months. Go south, so we'll see what happens. But anyway, hey, so today we wanted to talk about CISOs and kind of what's new for CISOs in 2025. Where they're going, and to reference, we wanted to talk about a new article that came out from CISA, the U.S. CISA group, called Corporate Cyber Governance, Owning Cyber Risk at the Board Level. And so there's a number of points that come into this article that they talk about. For decades, cyber risk was considered part of information technology risk and largely delegated to engineering and security teams. But more recently, corporate leaders have begun to see cyber risk for what it is, a strategic enterprise risk, and not their CISO own. Their CISO may not own it as long as and with the changes. But let's talk a little bit about cyber risk, Greg, and what is cyber risk now to an organization, and who owns cyber risk or risk in general inside the organization, and is that changing?
Yeah, definitely changing a lot. I think it's and a lot of it's due to just how cyber is changing, that cyber's become part of business, that they're indistinguishable now, they're overlapped. So that risk is overlapped. Now, there's not a complete overlap between them. Not all of one is the other risk, but all cyber risk is business risk now. There's enough of an overlap there. That's just part of it. You can't have your IT stuff fail now without it affecting your business at some level. Or costing you somehow. So yeah, they're indistinguishable. This is a change that's been going on for a while, but now what's changing is what the CISO does and who they talk to. So I think that's where a lot of this discussion is going.
Yeah, and one of the points that they make, one of the first points is where the decisions are coming from and who owns it. And so they're talking about clear ownership by the chief executive officer and board, and visibility by potentially impacted customers is now happening. So this risk is now being taken on by the board and by the executive staff. And this is where I think you're seeing some shifts in that if a CISO is going to be successful, they have to have that support from the other executives, as well as the board. Because like you said, business risk is cyber risk is business risk anymore. The adversaries that are targeting them are going to come from nation states. They're going to be cyber criminals from other regions of the world, and they're going to be targeting them as much as possible in order to gain an advantage inside their network. So looking at it from a risk perspective, I think also is the big shift we're going to see in 2025. Last year and in previous years, kind of the model of cybersecurity was throw a bunch of best of breed products across the network, and they should be able to detect a threat. The problem with that is, one, they're typically siloed. They don't communicate. They don't collaborate. It's hard to get visibility. And the fact that these attacks are going across the entire network now, that that one product might see small component of the attack, but they're not going to see the part of the attack in other areas, which this other product may see it, but then they don't know that they can collaborate and see visibility. So the risk side, moving to a risk approach, I think is where we're going to see a bunch of benefits in 2025. But that CISO role, man, it's tough. I mean, it's changing, but you definitely got to have that support, right?
Yeah, the old best practice and checklist stuff doesn't work anymore because, your data, your business situation, your customers, your apps are going to be different than the next person. So this is why this has migrated over the years to become this, cyber risk, and not just compliance and checklists are helpful and that can get you there. And if you don't do that, nothing good's going to come from that. But on top of that, these are business decisions, right? And this is indistinguishable. So yeah, it's really changed. And technical people can't make business decisions, and right. Business decision people can't make, technical decisions or cyber security decisions without being informed. So yeah, we're all in the same lifeboat. The challenge is that, the expectation that boards are just going to sign off on all good things. It's a different conversation. It's more about you're telling the board what you're going to do, and they're saying, you're sure you want to do that, and you think this is the best approach, because they're not going to accept any exceptional risk. But they're going to make sure that you have your ducks in a row, and you better have that, because if you mislead them, number one, that's bad. Or if the wheels fall off and you didn't do the best you can, well, that's great. But if the wheels fall off and you inform them of that risk, and it's within reason, then that should be all right.
Yeah. I think another area that we're seeing on the board side is this kind of technology called cyber risk quantification, CRQ, that's starting to give them actually numbers and amounts to address the risk of certain things inside the organization. Because boards love to talk money, right? How much is it going to cost if we implement this? And how much do we lower our risk if we do that? And I think, again, the tools that are coming out just over the last 2 years, even 1 year, are changing the game. I mean, it's totally changing the way cybersecurity is going to be implemented moving forward inside these companies, because you're going to have a combination of cyber risk. So I'm going to be able to give a risk score for all of my attack surfaces and all the different assets. But then I can also quantify how much is it going to cost in order to lower risk if I have to do it. That's a game changer, I think, in conversations between CISOs and the board, and CISOs and the other execs.
Yeah, there's been two different languages being spoken, and one is this general sort of what's the risk level, and then what's the business impact, that risk quantification. So if I say to you, the risk of ransomware is high. Oh my gosh, it's high, right? We get all excited, but for the business person, they're going to say, well, what's this going to cost us, and what's the likelihood of it happening within this year? What's the frequency of it happening? That's a really different language than we've spoken in the past. So when these converge now, we've got this common language, and it makes both sides uncomfortable. But at least we're talking about the same things. We can say, hey, the risk, we're going to get hit, likely 5 large ransomware attacks this year, and it's going to cost us probably, in our current state, $7 million. If maybe that's a good business decision. The IT security people may be running around like going, oh my gosh, the sky's falling. And the business people going, that's okay. If we have to spend 50 million more on safeguards, well, no, we're good with this. We accept that risk. We've seen the likelihood. We've looked at our peers as well, and that's another whole discussion: is what are our peers like? You level set that, and then that's a whole discussion you can have. Is the risk acceptable? Is it too high? Is it too low? And you go from there.
Yeah. Another aspect of this CISA thing is they talk about CISOs should ensure their peers and senior execs that oversee are well educated on cyber risk, and they also are looking to implement committees to deal with risk, because traditionally risk has been in the audit area, privacy area, and right. Because it's now a business risk and a strategic issue for organizations, they are maybe putting together committees that can look at risk differently from the traditional model, right?
Not for everybody. Keeping it in the audit committee is kind of the starting point. But moving it into somewhere else is an advanced maneuver that you should only do if you're able to have those kinds of conversations and you've got that capability, maturity to do that. Because otherwise it's going to be 5 committees. They're all handling risk in different ways. confusion, but it all comes back on the CISO with their average of 18-month life expectancy in their job. So.
Yeah, and one of the things they recommend is the CISO should review the company's cyber risk management framework. We talk about attack surface risk management framework and cyber risk management framework. Somewhat interchangeable, but there is a little bit of a difference there. But definitely, I think in 25, a CISO really needs to sit down with their key security vendors and talk about cyber risk management. I would also talk about, what are you doing as a business? What projects do you have are you going to be implementing in 2025 that need to be addressed? AI obviously there's probably every CISO is going to have an AI project or multiple AI projects coming into play in 2025. And then you have to sit down with your vendors and talk about, how can we secure this AI project? How can we secure our data? How can we secure our infrastructure? All of that needs to be discussed. And this is where the shift, in my opinion, is shifting more towards a partnership than just a vendorship, so to speak. You have to be a partner with that customer, because the customer has to talk to you about their projects and what they want to do, and you have to conform to them. You have to make sure that what you are offering them can support their projects and their strategy for 2025.
Yeah, it's also a question of that push and pull, that if you're ahead of your vendors, you're going to tell them saying, here's our risk framework and here's what we expect you to do. But if you're behind the vendors, it's okay to say to them too, say, hey, what do you see elsewhere, and give us a talk on that. AI is a great example. Last week's CISO roundtable that I led was, I always ask the same question: who has a policy on, AI relating to cybersecurity? And it's always this one had 3 out of about 15, which was remarkable. Typically, it's 1. So that, a different conversation with the vendor for those people who have that kind of policy and the safeguards they're putting in place versus those that don't. So that's where you have to be frank with yourself about how, are you a lean forward or are you a lean back? Are you behind the vendors, and communicate with them and to the vendors. If you're treating, your head people wrong, you're not going to be let back in the building. You've got to, assist them in getting cyber risk their way. Or if they're behind, help lead them, and not sit back, because otherwise, nothing's going to go well if you have a client who gets caught and hurt.
Yeah, I hear you there. And then, one other thing they talk about is actively champion a model of collaboration over self-preservation. You mentioned the lifespan.
Yeah, good luck with that with boards. They're masters. Any good board member is not going to be hanging themselves out to get hung on unnecessary risks. Like that should never be a surprise. You can't just dump your risk on the board and expect them to be all kumbaya about it. No, they're gonna hold you to the fire, and it's your job to not mislead them. Now, you have to have those frank conversations that if the risk is high and things are going to be bad, you've got to tell them and not sugarcoat it, because either way you lose, right? If you tell them it's going to be great and it's not, you lose. And if you tell them it's going to be awful and horrible and they spend a bunch of money, it's not going to be great either. So especially when those numbers, when we have cyber risk quantification, don't change and you've spent a bunch of money. So yeah, it's a really different skill set for CISOs now. It's grown up time, real different skill set.
Yeah. So I definitely found it interesting that CISA would come out with something like this and talking about, that you need to move it to the board level or the executive level. But I mean, it's good to see, and it's getting that visibility. But Greg, from your perspective, you talked to tons of CISOs and been a CISO, and in terms of 2025 recommendations, what strategy would you tell a CISO today? What steps should they take moving forward?
Yeah, you've mentioned the big ones already, I think, John, which have been great. So, attack surface management, you mentioned, tying in with your cyber risk framework and deciding what that's going to be, and then starting to look at that quantification and starting to have those communications with the board. And it's communication. It's not sort of you're going to get them to sign off on stuff. So I think that's the big 3. If you can get your attack surface tied down, you can start to really talk about managing, your risks rather than your technology, and get the communication going with the board, downwards to your staff, but also laterally to CIOs and business leaders. That's a really successful CISO. If you can get that done this year, you're going to be in great shape.
Yeah. And I mean, what I would add there, Greg, from my perspective, is a couple of things. I tend to be more technology focused, and the technology has changed so much just in the last year with generative AI and new databases, graph databases, and compute capabilities. The NVIDIA chips now that can do things. And what I would tell a CISO today is there's a couple of things. First and foremost, his biggest risk right now is his attack surface. His attack surface has gone crazy, right? With new stuff, new technologies coming in. He's got AI projects he's got to deal with. He's got new employees coming on and off. That attack surface has to get visible. And so the tools that are now capable of actually auto monitoring and identifying his entire attack surface, inside, outside, and everything in between. And then this is where it gets interesting, is the technology. I mentioned graph database, I mentioned AI, big data processing capabilities. You can take those attack surfaces and you can run it through the models today to identify and prioritize the risk associated with each and every one. Then you can actually get a sense of priority of what to do as a CISO and what areas you have to take address that are at high priority, high risk. Yep. And then the other piece is that the ability to send out mitigating controls and give you advice on how to fix those things. You didn't have that before. Now the technology, the platform capabilities today give you that capability. So again, talk to your vendors to see who can provide that type of support for you moving forward.
Yeah, you want to know your attack surface. That's number one. We've been overly hyper focused on the threat to the neglect of that. You need to do both, right? But everything can be answered by the attack surface. But it's got to be actionable, like you said. Just knowing your attack surface and going, hey, well done, we mapped our attack surface. So what? It's got to be actionable and then tied in with some remediation or management that you can do with that. Any CISO who's not asking for more telemetry is not doing their job, because there's a lot of attack surface stuff that's being looked at that's not really real. It's pretty soft and squishy. So it's got to be real, it's got to be timely, and it has to be actionable. If you've got that, then you can move on to actually doing something further with it. Yeah.
So great discussion today, Greg. Any last thoughts?
Recognize too some of the, I think with what you mentioned with CISA, they're actively involved. That's a great organization that's been elevated. But also look at your own situation. If you're a smaller, mid-sized business, some of that CISA advice may or may not be completely applicable to you. But also, if you're very, very lean forward, you're looking at some of that discussion and going, hey, we had that 10 years ago. But it's all good stuff and it's in the right direction. And even the best organizations need to kind of stop and check the dipstick and say, how are we doing?
Yeah. Always good to look back in order to get information so you can move forward, right? And then sitting down with your vendors on a regular basis, because it does have to be a partnership anymore. You can't just get a product dropped in and you go. It's tough.
Yeah. Hey, customer success is your success, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, listen, hey, everybody, thanks for listening to episode 39 of Trend Talks BizSec. Greg and I will be back in a couple of weeks to talk about another topic. Drop us a comment if there's a topic you want us to cover. We'd love to do it. Give us a thumbs up. But anyway, Greg, thanks for the conversation. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay warm out there.
Absolutely. Thanks again, John. Hey, fantastic talking to you.
Yeah, take care. Bye.
Hey, cheers on.